Hello friends, welcome to my channel SushantChessWise. Today we are going to discuss the next lesson of our CaroKann Pannov attack, and in this lesson we will see what we should do after studying the opening lines or prepare the variations, understanding the ideas, what is the next step. So this is our stage 2 of opening preparation. Here we will try to extract master games and we will try to see where the ideas what we are trying to use as white are becoming successful. So we will take the games which are won by white in this. Let's quickly start with the games. Today I will try to cover 4 games which will enable us to cover the important variations or the ideas. So let's start with this one. This was one of my games and the other 3 I am taking from Grandmaster examples. So E4, C6, D4, D5, ED, CD, C4, the Pannov attack, NF6, NC3. All the lines and everything I have explained in the first lesson. So we are discussing the move NC6 here, and as we do is we always play the move NF3 here, which allows the move C BG4. So in this game, I didn't want to enter this line. Hence what I did, I played with the move order of BG5. This is slightly different from our line. Since the resulting position was very similar, the middle game was very similar, I thought I will include this game also. E6, and now here see, it will be normally see NF3, BE7, C5. This gets back to the position like the game only in our line in lesson 1. You have seen that we have delayed the development of this bishop. This bishop comes a bit later. In this game, I went with C5, BE7, NF3, castle, and the move BB5. All the things are like the line. Only in the first lesson, what the line which I have discussed, in that this bishop is often developed to F4. Here the move castle is done and white plays A3, B4 plan, which also we will use here. So BD7, and now see, castle would be the normal kind of position. So I thought I will take on C6 first, and here black should take with B takes C, B4, A6, A4. Now he has the move Rook B8. So this is the best way for black to play. It is most difficult for white to get the move B5. So this is the point. Of course, white will have to work a little more, QB3, castle, Rook B1. So that will give him the B5 idea ultimately. He can sack the pawn on B5 to get a C passer. Bishop can often be rerouted to F4. But the opponent went with bishop C6. This looks like a natural response, but actually it's a slight mistake. Castle, ND7, BE7, Queen E7. To my surprise, see, this opponent was almost around 1930 rating or something, but the game went so smoothly, barely 12 moves by now. I got whatever I wanted here. See B4, and now it's very difficult to stop B5 in whatever way black can. There is nothing. See, I'll try to show you some ideas. If B6, then B5, BB7, C6 winning. If A6, then also A4, Knight F6, B5, AB, AB, BD7, and you see the move QB3. Knight is now heading from A4 to B6, and then soon we will place this knight to E5 and get the move C6. This is almost unstoppable. After B5, which was played in the game, I went A4. Idea is very simple. He cannot take B takes A because of B5, BB7, C6. So he goes A6, and now see AB, AB. If BB5, then also this is similar to the game. Queen E2, and you see after Rook A1, Rook A1, Rook B8, Rook A5, the B5 pawn is lost by force. AB, and now also Queen E2. The B5 pawn will be taken. You can see there is no good defense. If Rook A1, then takes Rook B8, Rook A5, Queen E8, trying to use this discovered attack idea, okay, on this, but it fails. After NB5, NC5, ND6, the intermezzo wins. QE7, and here we can just take with the B file, B takes C, and you will note that Rook B1 is nothing much to worry about, just there is Knight E1. White is a piece up. So qd8 was played in the game, and now I took on b5, 2k1, 2k1, qb8, and then I think the opponent missed this move na7. Nothing, he just lost the pawn, and look at the menace here. B and C pawns are just running away. After b8, b5, there is nothing much to do. We can just press in with the move c6 and b6. We have to be a bit careful. I was intending to go ne5 soon, trade some pieces, and then push these pawns. So opponent decided to resign over here. One of the benefits of playing against stronger opponents is that they realize that the position is losing and often cooperate quickly. Next two examples are from the main line. Let's go to them. So after the moves e4, c6, d4, d5, takes, c4, nf6, nc3, nc6, nf3, bg4. We are discussing the move c takes d5, knight d5, qb3, total main line, the one where the endgame arrives after bf3, gf3, e6. I have covered all the lines in my first lesson. Those who are seeing this lesson for the first time, they can definitely check that here there are other variations. nb6 is there, okay, nc3 is possible, nd4 is not good because see, knight d4 allows white to take qd5 perhaps. Do check that video for detailed opening variations. So e6, qb7, nd4, bb5 check. All this is theory. Now see nb5, qc6 check intermezzo. Black cannot interpose with the queen because see the a8 rook hangs. So ke7, qb5, qd7, and two options are there. Here see after nd5 check, we can play the same position without committing bg5, or else the other line is the move bg5, which I showed you in my lesson part 1 of this. Let's look at both the games, because whichever endgame you can choose. Both players are 2500 plus, and you will see what kind of endgame we can expect. White has slight edge. Let's see what happens. nd5, qd5, qd5, ed5, castle. This is the benefit of keeping this king on e7. We can quickly attack this d5 pawn with rook d1. So that is somewhat advantageous, I would say. Let's see this game, very interesting one. ke6, re1 check, king is driven away from the d pawn, and now see rook d1, rook d8, be3. White looks somewhat better only. We are getting blocked on the d pawn, and white wants to play a3, b4, b5, a4 and create his own passer. Position looks like equal, but it's very interesting play. Rook d7, rook a c1, be7, rook d4. Idea is to double the rooks. The rook is ready to shift to a4, f4, and of course this rook has choice between c5 or d1 depending upon what black plays. So bf6, rook check, ke5, and now see rook a4. White is all set to move his pawns. Black tries d4, otherwise white would have just put his bishop on d4, and that blockade is somewhat annoying. You can see after kd6 there is rook a6, ke7, re1 check. White is almost winning. So d4, rook a5 check, ke6, bishop f4, rook b7, b3, rook d8. Position is already clearly better this endgame, because white king is approaching soon. After king f1, d3 mistake, black fell into the trap actually. re1 check, kd7, rook e4. The idea is to trade the rooks and then come rook behind the passer. Also king is heading to e1. So be7, rook check, kc8 check, takes, and ke1. If rook d4, there was of course rook d7 by black. So ke1, bishop check, vd2, bishop moves away, be3, bb4 check. Basically white improved his bishop to e3, kd1, bc3. Otherwise see, rook d4 check is a good option when after the trade of rooks, bishop takes a7. So bc3, rook c4, bishop goes away, f4, bf6 and rook a4. The a7 pawn is lost and then king will establish on d2, which of course black stops. Bishop c3, ba7. Bit better to not trade the rooks instantly, but he could have. So rook b4 takes. You would have a similar position. bd4, g6, and now h3. First putting the pawns on the white squares, and then white wants to play not a4. He will use a3, b4, and then gradually push the pawns. First, we should push the pawns on the enemy bishop's color. Then the other square is in our control, of course. So in this, what happens? Opponent cannot place his bishops in front of our pawn. So f3, pawn was attacked. f5, gf will be just double pawns for black, nothing else. In fact, gf on the spot allows kd2, winning the d3 pawn in this case. bf4, gf, fg, hg, a4, f5, bishop d4, kd5, bf2. Now you can make out that by force there will be the move b4, a5, a6. The pawn on a6 is incredible because king cannot attack it from behind and king cannot go closer to it. So kc6, b4, kd5, a5, kc6, a6. This is the ideal combination. The pawn on white and the bishop on c black. So bishop and pawns occupy the other colors. The king is unable to move anywhere. bb8 loses to a7. So this is almost time to resign. After kc7, b5 you can make out. Soon there will be b6, b7 and we can cover the b8 square. So of course black resigned. Let's quickly go to the third game here. So instead of going to the move nd5 here, we play the move bg5. This we discussed in our game in the first lesson. bg5, f6, then we do nd5, dd5, queen d7, kd7, bd2. Here bd2 was played. Check in the lesson what we did. There is another plan of going be3, kc1, that is also there. bd2, rook e8, kd1, bc5 trying to attack f2, rook f1 temporarily a passive move, but soon there will be rook c1 followed by bishop coming to e3. So g5, rook c1, rook c8, ke2. Idea is be3 of course, bd4, be3. The trade of b2 for a7 is definitely good for white. Although I think here the advantage is not much. So be3, fe3. This exchange is rather a slight mistake, I would say. Rook c1, rook c1, rook b8, b3. This endgame, see, many will easily dismiss as equal, but there is a lot of play. Pawn structure is imbalanced and white is counting heavily on his queenside pawn majority. It's worth studying these kind of games in detail. So kd6, kd3, f5, h4, good move. The point is that after c, g takes h, rook h1, h5, rook h4, rook h8. Normally what one would assume, the rook behind the passed pawn, and this rook is passive, right? It has to be there. But the problem is on the other side, white plans b4, a4, and then see b5, give up this pawn, and king enters like this and gobbles all these pawns. So this is a tricky line. Although I think there also chances are okay for black, but it's somewhat problematic. See, b4, kc6, a4, a6, kd4, and now see after kd6 like move, we can do b5, take, and black's best chance would be to get into some kind of rook endgame with one pawn less, where his drawing chances could be still good. That he has to manage well. Okay, otherwise white is aiming for something like this kind of an endgame, where see, he is definitely much better here. Winning chances are very high. So black played g4, then h5, stopping black's h5, rook g8, rook g1, king e5, b4, g3, f4 check, kd6, rook g2, stopping the advance of the black pawn. And now see, white is all set to improve on the queen side. So rook g4, kd4, a6, a4, rook g8. Now the rook has to go back. b5, b pawn will be given for the g pawn. Rook b8, rook g3, rook b5, rook g7, rook check. The king can find shelter on this f3 square. So rook check ke2, rook check kf3, rook b3. The threat is d4. So of course rook h7 blunder because of d4. So rook g8 stopping d4, of course. d4 loses to rook check, king moves rook d4, winning for white. So ke6, rook check, kf6, rook d8, stopping d4 permanently. Rook b5, rook d7 attacks the h pawn, rook check, kg7. This is where the things are getting now ugly for black. All the pawns are weak and white is able to generate a winning endgame. ke2, rook check, kd3, rook h2, rook d5, h5, kd4, kg6, rook check, sending the king back first. Otherwise, king would come to h5. So kg7, ke5, rook h3, supports the pawn with rook d3. And now see, finally white decides to give up the pawn. This position should be technically drawn, but the rook is very active and black is unable to do much here after the move kf6. If see rook e8, I initially found this rook e8 to be better, but after rook h7, I don't think kg8, this line I was looking at, this tied down the king to the corner, and then after f5 rook check, rook f7, I found this line to be winning for white. After h5, f6, h4, ke7, see our pawn queens with a check. But I think there should be some defense. After king e8, I think we reach a very standard kind of Lucena position. After rook h7, rook a3, rook check, king is driven away, we win the pawn on h6. This is a standard technique. You can check out my Lucena positions on the Rook Endgame playlist. There you will find all the details. Rook check, g7, rook a5, stopping f5, king f7. Now see, rook is coming to f6, and this is a very, very ideal situation. kg6, ke7, rook check, ke8, and we are going to get f5. So rook c1, rook a7, not allowing the king to come back. kf6, rook f1, rook check, kd7. Personally, I found that here the move rook f8 solves all the problems, because now see, the king is able to walk to e7, g7, followed by improve the pawn. Okay, that is a quicker way perhaps. So after rook h8 game, in the game the player resigned here. The point is, of course, here if king d6 comes, then this is our standard Lucena idea. Bring the rook to d2, and after rook d7, kd7, rook here. So the king now improves zigzag. kg6, kf7, pawn keeps on advancing till f7 and king on f8. Then rook check is the standard Lucena position. Anyways, after rook h8, rook f2, rook f8, this position I was trying to show you this idea. And see, white wins. This is your standard Lucena idea. Rook check from d2 next. And one more game we will cover, and then we will move on to some other opening. So in this we are going to see a different line. The game is between Sveshnikov white and Mikhail Tal black. Let's reach the main position quickly. e4, c6, d4, d5, ed, cd, c4, nf6, nc3, e6, and nf3, and here black goes bb4. The Pannov setup taken by black, cd5, nd5, and we are choosing the line qc2. bd2 is another line, nc6, and now bishop d3. We discussed one Magnus Carlsen's game from this line, where knight into c3 followed by this knight d4 was played. For that game, of course, you can check lesson 1, plus you can search Magnus Carlsen's game, you will get from the database. In this position, Topalov also prefers the move a3 instead of bd3. You can come across his games also. a3, first pushing the bishop to a5 and then playing bd3. 2 or 3 games are available in that line also. Since we are discussing the idea of bd3, so we will stick to that. Basically, black may have to play the move h6 here, then his king side becomes weak. So then after castle, castle, white can of course transfer this queen from e2 to e4 and create kingside attack. So h6 is definitely a weakening move in such a case. So in this game, Tal went with nf6 and then castle, castle. We have a typical IQP position, rook d1. So this plan is somewhat different because now see d4 pawn was hanging. So white had to find a way. Bishop e3 is generally not a good way to defend the pawn. So with rook d1, there is indirect support on d4. Of course, we understand taking on d4 is instantly losing, takes, bishop check and rook takes queen. The queen is lost. So Tal goes h6 here, a3 challenging the bishop, bishop d6, knight e4. So with a3 what has happened? Black's threat of nb4 is not a serious one at all. So ne4, be4, bd7. White has more active bishops, better rooks, so his position is at least slightly better. Sveshnikov goes d5, opening the center, e takes d, b takes d5, and now there are already some threats. So first you can see the instant threat is bishop takes f7 followed by rook takes d6. Also, some may suggest there is the threat of bishop h6, pawn takes, and see qg6, which is also crushing, we can say. Hence, you will note that be6 is outright mistake because of takes, bh6, gh, queen check, king h8, queen check, kg8, again queen check, king h8, knight g5 should be enough to win the game. There are other ways also. We could have played here, queen e6, check and taken this bishop for 3 as well. So of course queen f6 was played and now bd2. Bishop is heading to the square c3, rook c8, bishop c3, ne5, queen e4, knight f3, queen f3. There is a small trap here, of course, queen f3 blunder because bf3, and you see these bishops hang along with the b7 pawn. So you can see there is no good way to protect these bishops. So queen moves away to g5 and bb7. White is clearly better. There is nothing that black can do really. bg4 and white saw the move qd5 over here where he retains the pawn. So rook c3, queen g5, hg5, rook d6, rook b3. Black got some activity in return, but I actually thought that this position is somewhat better for white only. See bd5, bishop was attacked, rook b2, and see weakness of the g pawn is visible. So h3 and b6. Black tries to create play here. The point is that after bishop e6 here, fe, rook e6 is blunder because of rook f2. Black is of course winning. White goes re1, bd5, rd5. Soon the g pawn will be taken and white has very good chances due to see both rooks penetrating the 7th rank. That is the main concern for black. So rook c8, black tries to invade white 7th rank. Rook g5, rook a2, rook g3, rook c7, stopping rook f7. White, whenever he wants, he can play rook f3 and guard this f2 pawn. So rook f3, rook d2, rook e5. Now see, the rooks can be doubled on the a file as well. f6, rook a5, this is the plan. Rook d7, rook f5. Rook a2, idea is to go rook d3, so rook f4. And now see, of course, if black would have played rook d3, then there could have been rook f a4. Even the move, what we can see after rook d3 can be the tricky move rook g4, when after rook a3 there is rook b5 and rook enters b7. This also looks very good for white. Rook d2, rook a4, rook e7, and see the a7 pawn is taken. So rook e1 check, king h2, rook f2. So we may well say that black managed to get the f2 pawn, but he had definitely seen the idea rook g4, as we saw in the previous line also. Now g7 is under fire, and whenever white wants, he can shift this rook in a much better way from the g file to the 7th rank. So g5, rook b4, and see this is totally winning. There is mating threat now. So rook e8 forced, and rook b7. Two rooks on the 7th rank, and this is called 7th rank absolute. All this I have covered in my rook endgame section. So this is of course winning for black. Nothing much is there. rd2, a4. This e8 rook can never come to e2 because of rook b8 or rook a8 mates. So rook d8, a5, rook a8, too slow actually. So rook g7 check. If king f8, then we can just play mate. So king h8 force, king is pushed to the corner. a6, rook a7, rook a7. Game over. Black resigned over here. Hardly there is any defense you can see to rook b7 followed by a7 and rook b8. I'll show you some ideas. Let's say first, if rook e6 trying to cover the a6 pawn, then kg3, king advances f5, h4, and this breakthrough wins easily for white. Gh, king h4, rook g6 trying to cut off the king, but then see king h5, rook g2, then just rook b7, and then see a7. Nothing much is there. After rook a2, queen, rook check, queens, and then the king comes. Rook comes and attacks the pawn and wins the pawn this way. There are many other ways to win. And after the move rook d6, just king g5, and you see that the f pawn will be taken as well. And if king g8 over here, then just rook b7, a8, a7. There is no defense to rook b8. So in future, I will try to get one more lesson of this line where we may see some black ideas, and I may also like to discuss some other variations. But my main purpose was to show you how we can extract games and make our opening preparation more complete and concrete. In future, I will make some more lessons based on how one should use software to search games and how to find relevant games for our opening preparation. So I hope you have enjoyed this lesson. Definitely let me know in the comments below. Thanks for your time.